Welcome back to another episode of My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Iconic. Today, we're going to embark on a journey into the intricate world of family trauma, guided by none other than Sheila Redfern, the compassionate force behind the Family Trauma Clinical Department at the prestigious Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families. Family trauma, two words that carry profound weight and significance in shaping the lives of countless children and young people. The subject veiled in complexity, often buried beneath layers of stigma and silence. But today we peel back those layers to shed light on this vital topic, and who better to lead the way than Sheila Redfern? Sheila's latest book, How Do You Hug a Cactus, serves as a beacon of insight, offering a poignant exploration of navigating challenging family dynamics. But her impact extends far beyond the pages of a book. With decades of experience and a heart dedicated to healing, Sheila has become a guiding light for families in their darkest moments. So, dear listeners, grab yourself a cup of tea, get ready as we embark on an illuminating journey from unraveling the complexities of trauma to embracing the transformative power of empathy and resilience. This episode promises to be both enlightening and empowering. So stay tuned as we delve into the heart of family trauma with Sheila Redfern, right here on My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Iconic. What initially drew you to the field of mental health and trauma work?
That's a great question to start with. It's interesting because I imagine there are some things that drew me to that I wasn't immediately conscious of. I think so. I didn't start off doing psychology. When I first went to university, I started off doing a human geography degree. And I think, like a lot of people in their late teens, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I just did what I was quite good at school. And because I was good at geography, I thought, well, I'll go and do something to do with geography. And then I did a year of human geography, which is still the study of people, populations, and different cultures. And I found that interesting. But while I was doing it, I just felt suddenly aware that I couldn't imagine what I was going to do with that subject in my life. And so I realized that what I was interested in fact, I read a book. What really kind of caught my imagination was I read a book that I think it was called something like Test Your IQ or What's Your IQ? And I got really interested in this idea of people's different sort of personalities, and what made people different from each other, I suppose, which was a bit like what the human geography course was about. So I switched then my degree to study psychology at Goldsmiths College in London University. And then after that, I went and worked in a long stay hospital for adults with learning difficulties.
Mhm.
And I think just working with people, it sounds really sort of simple, but I find it endlessly fascinating to try and understand how different minds work. Because, of course, everyone's brain is different from everybody else's, everybody's mind is different. And just thinking that that could be a career, I think fascinated me and still does. But I'm sure there are other reasons that are probably to do with my own family background that were operating at a more unconscious level. I don't have anybody in my family who had significant mental health issues, but my parents had quite a difficult marriage. They got divorced, had quite a difficult relationship with my brother. So I think all of those things were sort of in my mind, but I probably wasn't immediately aware of them. And then I think, like a lot of people in my 20s, I started to kind of be aware that, my mood wasn't always stable. And that was, and I started to realize that was probably quite common, that was quite normal, that people do get very low or get anxious or, feel really sad about things that have happened in their life. And I think I've always thought that mental health is just something very normal, that we all have mental health in the same way we all have physical health. And I think that's been my approach right from the very beginning, is to not think of mental health as something separate or other, but to think of it as just part of being human.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The body does keep score. So
exactly.
I,
Exactly.
I think everything intersects, doesn't it? And I feel like a lot of people like fail to real they put physical health higher than mental health. And I don't see that is a combination of
Why do you
things.
think they do that? What's your experience
Stigma.
of that?
I think it has
Yeah,
to be
but why? I mean, I get that, but I'm interested in why mental health is in a way more frightening or more taboo, more stigmatized than physical health. What do you think? What's your view of what that's about? Because that I think is interesting.
I think it's because it's with physical health, you feel it quite immediately. And I feel like it's sometimes even if it's like inside you, like I don't know, you've got cancer or something like that, but you can feel it
Hmm.
immediately or like throughout, and you can feel the pain. You can notice when things are not right. With mental health, if you realize when it could be like, in a few weeks, it could be in a few months or a few years. You don't feel it quite immediately. And that feeling is just, oh, it's just a feeling, it will go away. And and I feel like emotions and they're not I feel like emotions and feelings are not discussed. Like in like
Yeah.
a lot of, especially in like cu- um in different cultures and stuff like that as well. So
Yes.
it's
Yes,
very
that's true.
so I don't think if something's not talked about was like how can you understand that there is something? Like we spoke about, in year 7, year 8, like we spoke about mental health in school. Year 9, I sort of started getting it because it's not something that you expect to face because nobody talks about it. It's
Hmm.
like whereas a physical thing, a headache, oh my head hurts. Oh, let me take a paracetamol. It's people verbalize their physical problems, whereas emotional ones, it doesn't. So how are you able to say the same for yourself if people around you are not like, oh, I'm not feeling really low for the last few days. I think I might, you know, this is becoming a pattern. Did it,
Yeah.
it just. Mm,
Yeah, interesting. I think that's really interesting. I also think that it's an interesting question to me is when something becomes a mental health problem and when it's just an ordinary emotion.
mm,
And I think there's a kind of interesting conversation happening about, say, something like anxiety, which I work with children and young people, a lot of adolescents, a lot of, young people, young adults. Anxiety's on the rise. Like anxiety's risen massively, particularly since the pandemic. I think, certainly between 2017 and 2024, which is, only 7 years, we've seen mental health problems increase significantly from like 1 in 8, 1 in 6, and now people are talking about 1 in 4 young people having some kind of mental health problem. But to me, I think there's an interesting conversation about, is anxiety a mental health problem, or is it just an emotion that everybody experiences? And the circumstances in which you're living or find yourself now are more anxiety provoking, maybe than ever before. So I'm not negating serious mental health problems, but I'm just saying that it's interesting to think about how we define mental health. Because if
mm,
you said to me, Sheila, I've got my driving test tomorrow, I feel really anxious, I wouldn't think you've got a mental health problem.
mm.
But if you said, Sheila, I haven't left the house for 3 weeks, I feel really anxious about going out of my house, that might start to sound a bit more like a mental health problem. And I guess the difference is how much is it really interfering with your everyday functioning?
Yeah,
But I think there's still a question about, is it a kind of disorder, or are we just talking about emotions that everybody experiences, and some people are needing some support in managing those emotions.
Mm.
And, in a way, the only difference between someone who's got a mental health problem and someone who hasn't is that they can't get on with their normal life, and therefore they need to go and speak to somebody else or get some help from somebody else. But it's not to say that they're the only person who's feeling anxious or feeling depressed or feeling overwhelmed. Probably everybody feels that from time to time. The difference between someone who goes for help and someone who doesn't is just the degree to which they can cope with that, isn't it? Or the degree to which it's kind of stopping them getting on with their normal life.
Yeah,
And
definitely. I definitely agree with that. I think people, this is one thing that really annoys me is when people are like, oh my God, that was so traumatic. Oh, that it was like, and that made me feel anxious. Anxious, I get. But they're like, oh my God, I have anxiety. I'm like, there's people, like, people don't understand when you get like a condition and it's like, they don't realize how paralyzing it is.
yeah,
And it's just thrown around. I feel like it's great that it's gotten awareness. But people also need to understand you can't just throw around these words.
like
Be-
trauma is a good example of that, isn't
yeah,
it?
like, oh, I'm traumatized. And I'm like, you lost your pencil case, grow up. Like,
Your phone broke. That's not a trauma. Yeah,
must be. And I'm like, oh, like, and it's like so, and even traumatizing. Like, people don't, like, when things are traumatizing, people don't know what it looks like. They, they might see what it looks like in television. Sometimes a dramatization of trauma, it doesn't even show the full extent of trauma. Like
mm,
it affects you to the point where you you're so paralyzed in your ability to do anything in your everyday life. And everything is a problem. Every single thing that you do is difficult. Everything you can't, and it's so, and it comes to a point where it starts. You must know this. You must see people like that quite often at work. But really deep, like it gets to a point where it's so unmanageable that you can't be outside of the community.
yeah. Yeah, I think I see that a lot. And the team that I head up, we are called a family trauma team. So maybe if I say a little bit about that, that might be helpful to some people listening. So when we talk about family trauma, we're thinking of a trauma that's created by the relationships in a family. Could be any aspect of the relationships. It might be parent to child, it might be sibling to sibling, it might be grandparent, it might be foster carer to child, and anything. But for us, family trauma is where the child has symptoms of trauma that we might see with somebody, say, who has PTSD, but they haven't had a trauma like they've seen an explosion or they've been in a car crash, but the impact is the same on them physiologically and psychologically, in that the traumatic symptoms of being in a relationship that isn't good for them, that has been harmful or neglectful or abusive, or all of those things, we talk about that as being family trauma. Like you mentioned, the body keeps the score earlier, presuming in reference to Bessel van der Kolk's work. He's brilliant at thinking about developmental trauma. And that's really what I work with most of the time, are children and young people where they have these PTSD type symptoms, often the sort of thing you're describing about, not being able to kind of just cope with everyday life because everything becomes triggering or overwhelming. But the etiology of that and the cause of that isn't one single event. It's an accumulation of many, many years of traumatic experiences within the relationships that are meant to be the most protective. And that's, I guess, the most traumatizing thing of all, is that within these relationships where, you deserve to be met with love and care and security, instead it's the opposite. And so the traumatizing effect of that, we now know that looks like the traumatizing effect of being in a war zone. Those the kind of impact that has on brain development, the impact that has on behavior, whether it's sleep or flashbacks or hypersensitivity, all of those things, hypervigilance, all of those things look very similar in children who've had that family developmental trauma. I'm telling you stuff here, as they do to somebody who might have been in a terrible conflict where they were having bombs dropped on their house. So I don't think we can state enough the impact of traumatic relationships on children and young people. And then, of course, on adults, as they grow into adults, that traumatic impact doesn't just suddenly go away. It can sort of stay in the body for a long time. And that's what I'm most keen to help families with, help young people with, is I believe you can recover from those traumatic experiences, but it's not easy. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of understanding. And I think probably your average person doesn't understand what it's like to be somebody living in the world where you're carrying that trauma with you.
Yeah.
It's not visible. I think you said it earlier, you can't see it necessarily.
Yeah.
Hard to name.
Yeah, and it's so it's like people, I feel like people don't go around with compassion. Like you don't need to be like overly compassionate. You don't need to be like, hugging every other person that you walk past. It's like you just need to be mindful that people are going through situations that you may or not be aware of. Like people look at me and they'll be like, oh, she does this, this, this. I'm on a 3-to-1. Like I'm in those like situations. Like it's people need to people like like people see everything at face value and they shouldn't. You know what's ironic is coming from somebody with autism as well. Like it's not.
Yes. So there you are talking about people not understanding other perspectives, and you're somebody who's been diagnosed and labelled as somebody who has a great difficulty in appreciating other people's perspectives, which is ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think that it is true that we are all stuck in our own perspective a lot of the time. So, we see somebody maybe behave in a certain way. I was at a few weeks ago and somebody was getting very agitated trying to pick up their bag from the cloakroom. They didn't want to queue, and I could see a couple of people getting irritated with this woman, like pushing in or something. And I was wondering in my head, is there another story there? Because why? She's obviously agitated for a reason. And it's easy to just see that as somebody who just wants to get her bag back first, or somebody who's pushing in, rather than somebody who maybe has extreme difficulty with waiting, or or maybe needed to get out of the building quickly for some sort of sensory reason. There's loads of explanations. But I guess what's really hard is it's hard for all of us to sort of go around the world living our lives appreciating all these different possibilities all the time. We see things just through one lens most of the time. It's hard to kind of think, well, how I see it isn't necessarily how it really is. And I in my work, I talk about that as the capacity to realize. And that's, something that I write about a lot, is how to help children and young people and parents and carers learn how to mentalize themselves and each other. And that capacity is the capacity to try to step into the shoes of somebody else and understand what's behind their behavior, not, as you say, just looking at the surface of what you see, but thinking maybe what is behind that? What's the sort of backstory? What's the actual intention?
Yeah.
And I think that learning to do that actually makes you more compassionate towards somebody else then.
Yeah, and it's the thing it's like there's so many different possibilities. And like I don't think like the human brain can ever comprehend all the different possibilities that there ever could be. Because everybody's experience and like life experiences are so different. But
Mm,
if you like I feel like it's like going into a space where it's non-judgmental. It's like you're like, okay, this is happening. There's a difference between recognizing what's happening and then just being like, oh, This is all happening. This is what's happening. And it's just, I feel like when people are not flexible with the way that they think, how flexible in the way they think of situations, it causes great difficulty, not just to themselves, but other people as well.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like a situation that I encountered quite a few weeks ago, where this man is on the floor at a Starbucks. He's highly distressed. He has psychosis and he's homeless as well. And somebody's just starting to record, and I'm like,
really?
oh, trust me, I had a good word with him. Don't you worry. Like, I was like, and I was like, why are you filming? First, I started giving like, like a what you're doing. He's not looking at me. He's more focused on filming. And I went into him and I'm like, stop filming. Why are you filming? And he's like,
Yeah,
well, it's funny. It's funny. Like, I'm like, it's not funny. And you don't know
yeah.
what that person's like, like going through. And also, you think they're distressed and focusing on their distress. They may not be able to remember or process everything that's going on in that moment, but it doesn't mean they're not going to process it later.
Mm,
And it's
mm.
like, I feel like I understand where people come from when they say people are not so compassionate and there's no hope for the future. I
Do you
understand where they
believe
come from.
that? Do you believe that though yourself? Or do you just understand that feeling?
I think I can understand the feeling, but I don't think I believe that.
Yeah.
I feel
You can
like,
understand the state of mind. That's the important bit, isn't it?
yeah,
That I think that the compassion comes from, even if you don't feel that way yourself, it comes from being able to sort of, yeah, as I say, I would call it mentalize, being able to step into that person's shoes and imagine what it feels like to be that person. And I guess if we were being really sort of fair, we could step into the shoes of the person who was filming that man, even though we don't like what he was doing, and think he was maybe thinking, this might make me a bit more popular than I already am if I post something that I think's funny. Now, that's
yeah,
not kind, that's cruel, and it's an invasion of privacy and it's manipulative. But it might be, you know, a person who does that's probably not got a lot going on in their own life, potentially. And this is something that, well, I post this and I'm going to get loads of likes. Somebody's going to think, oh, he's funny. You know, we could also maybe imagine why he's doing it, even though we don't agree with it.
yeah.
And I
And
think that is important, isn't it? Otherwise, we just get into conflict all the time.
mm,
Um,
yes,
and that doesn't usually win people over, even though we might feel like screaming. There's something I think that's really valuable about saying to someone, I don't like what you're doing, or I don't agree with you. And this, of course, is a lot of the work that I do with parents and carers with young people, is they often have really opposing views to their young people. And I'm often in the position of saying you don't have to tell them what they're doing is something that you agree with, but don't invalidate it, and certainly don't mock them or shame them for thinking that way. Try and understand why they do. And
I feel
that
like,
seems to me.
sorry, I feel like
Go
the lack of understanding is the issue
Yeah,
with lots of problems. It's I feel like understanding, like, I feel like when a person's distressed, it's not the best time to ask, but afterwards be like, do you know what led up to it? Do you know what could have been different? Like, stuff like that.
yeah.
And I feel
But what
like,
you just said there, Rashmi, with the not the at the time is important too. And sorry to interrupt you, but you just made me think that that's the key for me is, yes, we've got to try and understand it. The difficulty is trying to understand it and unpack it in the moment, isn't it? Because that's when, everybody's emotions are running too high usually. And
mm,
that's the time when it's really hard to mentalize, really hard to be reflective, is when our emotions are extreme. They might be really excitable, or we might be really angry, or we might be really sad or upset. But if we're kind of at either end of those extremes, and I talk about there being like an emotional thermometer, if you think like a thermometer, you've got like the cold temperature and you've got the hot temperature of your emotions. And when your emotions are really, really hot and intense, or when they're really cold and sort of you're switched off, maybe a bit detached, really hard then to mentalize, to try and reflect, to try and understand, as you're just saying, about what was behind that. Let's unpack it. I think the timing, what you were saying about timing is the key thing, isn't it? Is how, what's the right time to have a conversation? Like you've planned this time to talk with me. I'm presuming at a time that feels okay for you, and hopefully in that you've also thought what might work for Sheila, because it's how we try and plan things, isn't it? Is to make sure we get the best out of a meeting or out of a conversation. And you probably wouldn't do it at 9:30 at night, but you might do. That might be your time to sort of come alive. But if you were thinking about me, you might think, oh, Sheila's a bit older than me. She might be getting a bit tired by 10, certainly by 10:30. And timing is important, isn't it? Like, when do you have those conversations with somebody about their behaviour and what it means?
I feel like ideally, I feel like if you're in a place where you're unable to communicate, like if people don't know like how to, let me rephrase that. I feel like if people like if you have support staff or your parents, carers, whatever it may be, if they don't if you're in a place where you're unable to self-regulate or need help regulating and unable to see the
Yeah.
warning signs, the little
Yeah, I know what
signs,
you mean. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like then you have to ask afterwards. However,
Yeah.
if you like find it difficult to self-regulate, whatever, and there's somebody, if they noticing these little warnings, that's the perfect time in the middle of it, like where you've
Yeah.
recognized what's going on. It's like promethazine or PRN. You're not going to give it to someone when they're at the very height, unless it's
No,
taking a while to calm down. You will usually
exactly.
be like, oh, I'm noticing it. That's crazy. You know,
Excuse me.
yeah. And it might. Do you want some help? Do you want some medication? Do you want to go to central rooms? I don't. You know.
Yeah. I think what's difficult is that when you're in a, say, heightened state of emotion,
Yeah.
it's very difficult in that moment to know what you think and feel. So say somebody asks you, like a parent or carer says, oh, what can I do to help you right now? Chances are in that moment, you don't really know. And I always think that there's something really important about slowing things down. Kind of, I see a lot of anxiety in parents and carers to fix things quickly. They want to leap in, and I'm probably the same with my own children, who are now adults, two of them, one of them's a teenager. Your instinct is, I want to make this better, I want to fix it, I want to help, or I want to stop it. It might be something dangerous, like I don't want, I want to just change it. And I think it's equally, if not more important, for parents and carers to regulate themselves and to think, what is it that's making me so anxious to fix this quickly? Not like, why won't they stop doing that? Or why can't, or how can I help? But just, why do I so urgently need to do something about this? And, 9 times out of 10, it's because I can't cope with how I'm feeling, or I'm speaking as a parent here, but I'm trying to speak for parents and carers and say that's what I see in my work is a foster carer or adoptive parent or a birth parent just desperate to kind of stop something, change it, fix it, make it better, cut it out. And it's usually because of what it's doing to them, not just what it's doing to the young person.
Mm.
And so there's something that's really important, I think, about separating out different minds. We started this conversation by saying about everyone's mind's different, everyone kind of has different perspectives. Well, that's obviously true for young people and their parents and their carers, is how you feel about something. I don't know your personal circumstances, who you live with, but you live on your own, but how you feel about your life and what you need right here and now might be completely different from what your closest relationship is thinking that you might need right
Yeah.
now.
Definitely. I feel like with, a lot this is a lot of things because I have support workers. I live in a supported accommodation. So
Right,
I have 3 people all the time around the clock. So,
right.
and I feel like sometimes I agree with you. Sometimes if you're in an airplane and it's, going into disaster, like some disastrous situations happening, you put your oxygen mask on and then you put your child's oxygen mask on.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I feel like, especially when I find it difficult to self-regulate. I'm getting better, but I'm still finding it difficult. But
Yeah.
once I see someone else getting really, if I see stress and somebody getting distressed that are supposed to be in a trusting, caring position, that will escalate. It's like a child and they've like fallen over, like a young
Hmm.
child, and they haven't felt pain, but they just hear it and they start crying.
Yeah. Exactly. That's it. Exactly. So it's like the reaction of the person, exactly that situation where you might have a parent rushing to school with their toddler and the toddler falls off the scooter or something and they scrape their knee. And yes, they probably start crying because it hurts, but then they also look to see what's the reaction of my mum or dad or granddad or whoever it is. And if they see a kind of face, immediately, child, this is something's terrible's happened to me. Um, and it's that lack of containment that makes the self-regulation so hard, isn't it?
Mm.
You probably have that maybe as a woman in your, I don't know how old you are. How old are you
I'm
roughly?
18.
Right, 18. So you're a, young adult. You obviously aren't falling off your scooter, but you might have an emotional reaction to something. And then one of your support workers around you, if they don't have a reaction that kind of helps you regulate and contain that, I don't know. What does that do to you, would you say?
I think if there's some situation where somebody like let me give you a very some reason it's like yeah if somebody's all around me like all 3 people there's another support worker for the other young person but there's all 4 of them around me and they're blocking my way for me going to my safe space like my room. I want to
Mm.
get more freaked out. I'm gonna get
Yeah,
really freaked out. I'm gonna get distressed. I might start stimming a bit more, might start headbanging and be like trying to self-regulate. I was probably start stimming and if that's not working, then I'm like, okay, this feeling is not going away. I can't so what am I gonna do next? They're blocking my way and they're blocking my way, but I'm not doing anything to hurt myself or other people. So in my head
yeah,
it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, is there
yeah,
something I'm not guessing?
yeah.
So so there's
That
like
sounds quite confusing.
yeah, and like I don't know, but like I have younger states of mind that I can be in as well. So or younger, like Roro, my youngest self, she's a few years old. She probably doesn't know what's going on. She's probably like really, really like, oh my God, what's going on? This is
Mm,
they're not like like happy looking or cheerful. Her language is very limited and stuff like that, and nobody's engaging with her. They're just all around her. And they look stressed and they're talking really, really fast. And then,
mm,
the sensory stimulation is too much. And it's like
mm.
probably going to lead more distress.
Yeah,
And it's probably going to be in a place where it becomes more unmanageable for me and the
yeah,
people around me, which
yeah,
might escalate into getting further help from,
yeah,
a third party.
yeah. Well, what do you think? That all makes sense. I wonder though if what's clear in your head isn't so clear to those people around you, and not because it's your responsibility. I don't mean it that way, but just how do you think they could learn to respond to you in a way that is more helpful? Or obviously to not respond because it's what you're saying is they sort of get in your way when you're trying to get to your safe space. They are kind of like worried that you're going to do something maybe harmful to yourself. I'm not sure what's going on in their minds, but what could you do to let them know about what you need, do you think?
I'll be honest with you. I'm moving from here. It's not suitable placement. They're unable to meet my needs.
Okay, so that's that's one solution then. Get to a different place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Because you don't feel understood there?
no, it's not a feeling understood. It's they're unable to
No?
meet my autism needs or
Okay.
like so it'll be like a lot of they will grab me, they will
Oh
leave bruises
gosh.
on me. They will like their normal voice is a shouting, screaming voice. So I
Okay.
isolate myself all the time in my room.
Oh
So
dear.
if
That
I if
sounds really unsuitable for you.
yeah,
Horrible. Yeah.
yeah. And they do
And
this
have
as
you
well.
got a move? Have you got a move of placement coming up?
No, it's
Do you
hard.
want to?
Social services want to, and I want to.
Mm, mm,
But it's really difficult. Especially, I feel like this is a problem. This is a really like fascinating thing I could like talking on the podcast about. Is I feel like if you have such like people like schools, like treatment places, they prefer when you have. I feel like if you go to CAMS and you go tier four stuff, that
yeah.
they're more understanding. But below that, or in
Yeah.
placements, or wherever you live, education. Once you have more than one set of needs they will reject your application or they will be like, no, this is not something we can deal with.
Right.
And I feel like that's a constant problem. I feel like
Yeah.
it
Do you feel
systems.
that's what's happening to you, that you've not got just one straightforward issue that they can kind of
Yeah,
put into a neat category, but you've got many different intersecting issues?
yeah, definitely. Like I got
Yeah.
like TPTSD, I got autism, ADHD, I got EUPD, and then I feel like I'm missing something else as well. And it's like all of them,
Yeah.
they might have certain things in common, but they're
Yeah.
also very complex issues. And I feel
Yeah.
like and especially like adult social care in general, that I've noticed over certain local authorities and even local authorities that I do training with, is they don't understand fluctuating capacity. And
Yeah.
that's a very like uncommon experience, a very rare experience for them, because they're used to people with little to no capacity at all.
It's
For
so, yeah.
yeah,
You're so
so
insightful. It's so interesting hearing you talk about, this experience because I mean, and fantastic that you do this podcast because that's what my feeling was when when you got in touch first, is that you're bringing to light your lived experience in a way that, you can't be kind of learnt through, a clinical training because, you've named like three or four different diagnoses there. And everybody will have an understanding on paper of what that is, EUPD, ASD, ADHD. But it's much more nuanced than that, clearly, when you're living it and when those different things start to intersect and impact on how you feel about your current, living circumstances. And I think it's just so important to raise awareness of that lived experience in order to not just get your own needs met. Obviously, that's a priority. You need to get somewhere where you feel safe, clearly. But also by having these sorts of conversations, you can start then educating other people in the system, social care, mental health, education, physical health. I think that's fantastic. And I suppose I have a question for you. I don't know if you feel comfortable
go
answering it or
for it.
not.
Go for it. I'm
My
not afraid.
question is about, because your podcast has the title, trauma in it, traumatic, You're iconic, but you're talking about traumatic experiences as well. How, what's your understanding of the impact of your own trauma on what's the intersection for you of trauma and these diagnoses that you've got? To say something like EUPD, how
Oh,
much for you is that related to, and I'm not asking you to go into personal details, just more like sort of the sort of overview, if you like, the headline of it. How much do you understand those things as being part of a traumatic experience? And how much for you are they somehow separate or other than that?
I feel like my trauma, I feel like my biological parents' neglect, also comes, with their and they didn't teach me about emotions. They didn't teach me, oh, you have a stomach ache, you might be anxious, you or happy,
Mm.
sadness. Like they didn't teach me that sort of stuff. So I feel like
Mm.
it contributed to my poor emotional regulation. I
Right.
feel like my autism and contributes to that as well, my ADHD, because understanding of emotions is more difficult with people who are autistic.
Mm.
And I feel like the ADHD is able to contain that emotion and not like, I got diagnosed with ADHD because of my mental health, because of my impulsivity was so high.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, my emotions, it's like, it's okay to sit with it. It's okay to feel these things and not to
Yes.
just go, I don't know, go to, kill yourself.
Yeah.
So, and and I feel like that's one of the biggest intersections. And I feel like
Mm.
it's, I've noticed this pattern, correct me if I'm wrong, but like what I've noticed in the NHS, they use emotional dysregulation as a title for like emotional unstable personality disorder for young children because they can't diagnose them with the personality disorder.
That's
I mean,
right. Well, under the age of 18, there's
yeah,
still a sort of an official, I mean, it's more within psychiatry than, so I'm a clinical psychologist, but psychiatry have this very arbitrary diagnostic sort of cutoff. So if you're sort of 17 and above, you can have an emerging personality disorder, but you can't be diagnosed. And then, excuse me, I was going to get some water. As soon as you hit 18, you're kind of eligible then.
yeah. And it's so like it's so I feel like there's so many intersections. And you know what? I've only even got diagnosed with emotional so personality disorder a month ago. So I'm still learning. But I feel
Yeah.
like, it's a lot. It's like, it could be a contribution of genetics, of experiences, and like, your environment. And my environment, even when I've been in care, my environment, I had a very abusive foster carer, my first ever foster carer. She was very abusive. And I feel like it's also how,
Very sorry you had that experience.
oh, it's okay. It's not okay, but I've come to terms with it. I feel like it's a lot of experiences that I've gone through have taught me, oh, so this situation happens, this is how you react. This is the one that's going to keep you the most safest. Whether it's violent, a lot I've spoken to a lot of other young people through my work, and even like on a personal level as well. And it's like people, other people, like when they see authority figures like police officers or paramedics or NHS staff,
Yeah.
the people usually won't be, I don't know, physically aggressive, verbally aggressive towards them. But
Hmm.
they've learned that this is okay because when I'm feeling unsafe, this is what protects me.
Yeah.
Even whether it's right or not, it doesn't matter. This is what's going to keep me safe. That's all that's important.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I was at home, I also took that as a literal thing as well. This is what this means. This is I'm going to punch someone to keep myself safe. I do this. But like, I feel like then with that literal part of my brain, I need to like be like, okay, maybe that's not the situation. Maybe what if I talk to this person? What if? But
Yeah.
you don't think about that because you're like
No, not in the time, not in the
yeah. I'm
moment.
just like, okay,
Yeah.
whatever keeps me safest, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Well, yeah, I think you'd explained that really clearly earlier as well when you were talking about wanting to get to your room and starting stimming as a way of helping yourself regulate and to get to your room safely, that you're using the strategies that help you in that moment. And one of the big difficulties that you must experience and that I definitely see in my work is getting other people to understand the meaning of that behavior for you and to not see it, to not label it, not see it as a negative or aggressive, but to see it as if you like, an adaptive strategy.
Hmm.
So it's like, the child that might lash out in class might have done that exactly as you just described because that's the best way he feels of keeping himself safe in an environment that feels threatening. But if we don't understand, or the general public doesn't understand, that that's because that child feels under siege. They feel like people around them are threatening, even if they're not actually, but they've got that perceptual bias that looks at someone's face and thinks, oh, that's a threat, which we know that that's what trauma does to the brain. It primes you to look and perceive threat even where it doesn't exist, or faces appear more threatening, or voices do, and you go into a kind of fight, flight, freeze reaction, like without any of that understanding of how trauma impacts the brain and impacts perception of other people's intentions and behaviors and all of that. Without that, it just looks like someone being aggressive
Mm.
or being unfriendly. And then you've got added on top of that your autism diagnosis, which means that maybe those faces and those intentions are a bit harder to read anyway. And you're having to work twice as hard to try and control your environment, to keep yourself safe, to understand other people's intentions. That's a lot of work you're having
It
to
is.
do. Must be exhausting.
It is. It is. I feel you think it will get me more sleep, you would think. But it's
You
so
know, your
no.
brain's too busy
It's
processing.
it's on overload. Like honestly, trust me.
Yeah, yeah, I can
It's
imagine.
so it's the thing is, and people don't realize when there's only so much a person can do to control things.
Yeah.
And and it takes a long time to relearn behavior. Like like I was in like at home for 14 my family home for 14 years and 7 months. And I've been out for 4 months. I mean 4 years next month. And that's still not enough time for me to learn
No.
these things.
Yeah, that's right. That's a small part of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like when people, like, for example, I got kicked out of our hospital when I got really, really distressed and people would touch me and stuff like that. I would like lash out. Lash out, that's the term they use, lash out. And and they are and you know what and there's seclusion. Those who don't know, it's like a room where somebody can sit on the other side and watch you, you know, when for their safety and yours. And I thrived in seclusion. It was great.
What did
Like
you like about it?
it was low stimulus. I had like
Yeah.
mood lightings as well. There's mood lightings you
Yeah.
can in the room, but it was by myself. It's very low stimulus.
Yeah.
There's nobody touching me. There's nobody talking to me, and I'm
Mm.
able to control it. This is what I do at my placement as well. Like if I isolate myself and I control the environment and I'm all by myself, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's crazy. And then I got kicked out of that
Yeah.
hospital for the same reason.
Yeah.
But it's like people, I feel like, and it's like the thing about like psychiatric wards, what I've noticed is those people who get kicked out of hospital are the ones that need the most help.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people who are very impatient and they don't try to understand. And especially when you're t two different sorts of they see two different sides of you where you're very
Mm.
these times but high functioning and all of a sudden you're really distressed, you're unable to communicate and you're like, speak to me, speak to me, speak to me. And I can't physically get the words out. I can't speak
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
think that is, yeah, I've often wondered about that term high functioning, and whether it's helpful or unhelpful, because it's a bit of a kind of double-edged sword to me that high functioning implies, oh, you're kind of doing quite well. Like you're capable, you're articulate, you're sort of insightful, all the positives, which obviously those things are positives. But then it also implies like you should be able to cope well, you should be able to function well, and maybe it makes it harder for people to understand when you then become quite acutely distressed by something, and for people to sort of almost match that with your high functioning label. I'm really curious, Rashmi, about whether you find your diagnoses helpful or not to you.
I think I find my diagnosis helpful in terms of the fact that it gets me the help that I need. It
Right.
signposts professionals to the support to the right or most effective support for people with those
Yeah.
diagnoses. What I don't find helpful about the diagnosis is people define me by those diagnoses. This is a part of me. It's autism, like autism is me, it's who I am. But I don't want to just be seen as an autistic girl.
Mm.
And there's
Yeah,
other qualities about me. My autism,
of course.
I'm very loud and proud about it. But it's not all about that. It's like saying, "Oh my God, you're neurotypical." Like you would, or like somebody like
Yeah.
epilepsy comes under divergence, and nobody goes be like, "Oh, it was such a superpower. Oh my God, you need assistance." Like they will,
Mm.
they will be able to tell you when they need additional support if they need
Yeah.
additional support, and like being treated like just because of that. And the other thing that people think because of this type, so it's very deficit based. Them
Yes.
thinking is very
Yeah.
deficit based, and they think,
Yeah.
oh, you can't do anything for yourself.
Well,
What do I
I
do
mean,
for you?
yeah, that was sort of partly what was behind my question, because I was wondering if, like, you've answered it in a way by saying it's, can be a help, can be a hindrance. So the help, as you've said, is you might get some of the services, the support that you need because you've got the diagnosis. But I wonder if it becomes another traumatizing thing in itself, if you have ever experienced any bullying or hostility, abusive behavior because you've got a diagnosis? Like, have you ever, because you've got a diagnosis of autism, say, which can be used as a very abusive term towards people. People could say, "Oh, you're so autistic when you do X, Y, Z," like as if that's a horrible thing.
Hmm.
Have you had any experiences like that where your diagnosis have been used as something to traumatize you with?
So my autism can be used as a lack of capacity. And people
Hmm.
will use, well, she has autism, she has this. This causes her to react like this. Or this makes her behavior look like this. So she does not have capacity. My diagnosis does not define my capacity. It might contribute to how my
Mm.
capacity is,
Mm.
but it's like and I feel like a lot of people don't realize, especially social care, is even though they get reminded by like NHS professionals time and time again, capacity is a time and place thing. It's not like oh my gosh, she has capacity for the next 7 days. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's right there
Yeah.
and then. It's like
Yeah.
I have capacity. Most of the I struggle with doing everyday tasks. I do, but that's not because of lack of capacity. That's because I wash my hands obsessively, but I don't do well with water. Water makes me really distressed because of
Right.
some physical abuse I've gone through before.
Hmm.
So, but
Hmm.
before I was made fun of, before pre-diagnosis, about my autism, I was non-verbal. I was non-verbal, and I was in that school from year three to year six, and nobody ever thought I was autistic. I would not speak. Nobody, some people thought I was mute because I
Yeah.
didn't speak at all, and they were like, "This girl's weird. This girl's strange." And when I used to get really
Yeah.
obsessive with stuff and start stimming, people would find it weird.
Yeah.
But I don't like it when people are like, "Oh my God, do you think she's autistic?" She's not. And even if I did think she is, I'll be like, "Oh, she might be." But like, am I a professional? Do I have?
Mm.
Hey,
Mm.
trust me. Like, I'm not doing a whole ADOS for someone. I've done once before. Great, lovely. That's it. It's too exhausting.
Yeah. 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 So I'm asking you questions partly that I hope they're not exhausting for you. So you
No,
must
no,
tell
no.
me if you want me to not ask these questions,
No,
because
it's okay. It's like nice to have a
yeah.
back and forth conversation.
Yeah.
No, but
Because
ADOS is like
yeah,
exhausting. All
yeah.
these,
I mean, I do ADOSs on some
you
people
get
in my,
exhausted.
do I get exhausted? Um, that's a good question. Not really. But I try to sort of do it in a way, I try to pace it with some, I mean, I've done it in two parts often with young people, just because I think if you do it in a way that's more, obviously it's meant to be a conversational kind of assessment. The thing, if you think of what the individual needs are of the person you're with, I try to not stick to a rigid, like, or you've got to have an hour, or you've got to have 50 minutes, or particularly with people your age or a bit younger, I probably generally wouldn't try and do anything for more than like half an hour, 40 minutes. Because I think
Mm.
that's enough for somebody. Like I'm asking quite a lot of them. It's a lot of interaction, a lot of stimulation. And in a way, when I carry out an ADOS, I'm looking to rule out autism, not to rule it in. So I'm looking for like, I'm not looking from a deficit perspective. I'm looking for like, what are your strengths? Oh, that's something you can do. That's not autistic. So I take that approach. And that was the way that I was trained, was not to look for pathology, but to look for strength. So I think, oh, that's good. You like making good eye contact, or you're really imaginative, or you're concentrating well there. And I
You know
think if
what? I
you
hate
set,
that frog book.
you hate the prompt book.
The
Yeah.
frog. Oh my God, the frog book. And I'm like, why is
Oh,
it frog?
what, the Tuesday book, the book Tuesday, is it that one?
It does have frogs in it.
Yeah, like they're flying
Oh
toads.
my God, why are they flying? Like, why are they flying? Frogs don't fly. And it was some sort of lily pad thing they were on. And I'm
That's
like,
right. That's right.
and she was like, what's happening? And I was like, I don't know what's happening. It looks like they're
Mm,
moving through the sky on a lily pad. It's all so. I said so many things in my ADOS that was so questionable. Like, I thought it was okay, but when it's written in a report, I'm like, seems like
It
that was a
must be
problem.
hard to read. I've never had, that's interesting for me to hear you talk about your experience of the ADOS because um, I think that's important feedback for somebody who's assessed you to know what your experience was like.
Mhm.
And for me, giving a diagnosis is only helpful. Well, it can obviously help with resources, that's true. But that is questionable whether you'll get those resources always. You don't, sometimes you might, sometimes you might not. It's a bit of a postcode lottery, depends what school or college you're in or employment place. But I think identity is crucial for anybody, whatever their age, but particularly your age and a bit younger, like knowing who you are, understanding yourself. I think anything that helps with that is good. So, you might think that for you, being knowing that you have autism is a part of your identity. But as you said, it's not the whole of your identity. That's not all you are. That's just an aspect of who you are, any more than like me having brown hair is all of who I am, or green eyes. I mean, it's just a feature, isn't it? But it's not your whole identity. And I think it's really important that you give that message to people. That's definitely a message I tried to give to someone if I do an assessment of them. I don't say, "What, like, you're autistic." I say, this is like the way your brain tends to sort of see the world. And so these kind of things you're really good at, these kind of things really annoy you, or some of these things you do really annoy other people. And I think we all need to understand ourselves in order to feel mentally healthy. Coming back to where we started in the conversation about mental health, I think one of the things that makes you mentally healthy is understanding yourself. And when I think any time in our lives where any of us feel confused about our identity or afraid of who we are or unhappy with who we are, I think then that's, often a source of great distress.
Mm.
So if it's an unhelpful name because it brings bullying or stigma, then it's not helpful to have a diagnosis. But if it brings an understanding and a sort of sense of regulation, like, oh, I know in that situation I'll need to stim, or I know in that situation I'll need to get out of that underground train, or in that situation definitely won't want to go to that party, then that's helpful, isn't it? Because that's you knowing yourself well.
I feel like when I was very skeptical when I was told, oh, I might be autistic and we might need to do some assessments. But I was given, she knew my psychiatrist in Springfield knew that I needed written information. So I looked through the information and I was like, I have this. Is this why I'm like quite strange? Like this explains a lot. Like this is things that it keeps bothering me. It makes me angry. It makes me really frustrated. But I didn't know it could be because of this.
Mm,
And the one problem that I have is with work is noise cancelling headphones. they're not really fully noise cancelling. You can still hear what's going on, but it cancels out a
Yeah.
lot of things. Like, for
Yeah.
example, in one of my workplaces, I got denied part of my access to work. It got approved by access to work, but got denied by my employer
Yeah.
because um I'm delivering training, so I wouldn't need noise cancelling headphones. But I would thrive with noise cancelling headphones.
It's so strange. Yeah.
And I was like, no, I didn't
What training do you deliver?
expert by experience training. So we've done, let me think. So we've done relationship based training. And then I've done I've done Merton's safeguarding conference between children and adults.
Yeah.
So children and safeguarding and adult Merton adult safeguarding practices both came together, and people who worked within Merton, sort of training, a lot of safeguarding relationship based, di di identification. We did one on that. Yeah, that's what's
Fantastic. Fantastic. So important. That's
yeah, and
brilliant.
it's different to hear it from like a young person's perspective
Yeah.
because they usually hear from like, people who get experienced by education. That's
Yeah.
great, but it
Yeah.
doesn't there needs to be multiple views on the table.
Of course. Yeah.
And when you
Yeah.
don't have that, then the work that people would do is quite ineffective because it's like you're just making a decision based on one sort of experience that you've had. When you have multiple things,
Mm.
there's multiple things to consider, which might be a lot, but is necessary to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, well, it's so important to have people like you doing this work. I was listening to some people a couple of weeks ago who were from this organisation, Care Experience Movement. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a charity.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's transformative to work with people like that and like you because, yeah, it doesn't, I said it before, it's not enough just to sort of have an understanding at a kind of cognitive level or a training professional level, but the lived experience is what actually helps people understand the individual experience of people rather than the labeled, diagnostic experience. So
And it helps.
fantastic.
It helps us, but we also sit on interview panels as well.
Yeah.
So there's like, I feel like there's certain things is like, I feel like young people who have gone through certain experiences can see certain things that the other like professionals can't see.
Hmm.
And
Definitely.
just because they tick all the, requirements and boxes and they answer the question perfectly, there's certain things that they do that you're like, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book.
Okay.
How
Sure.
do you hug a cactus?
Yeah. I've got it here to show you. It
I was looking for it. Is it on Amazon?
is on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad I ordered the right book because I've ordered it
Ah,
on Amazon like
yeah, it's
today,
on Amazon. Yeah.
and I was like, is this the right book? And I saw your name up. I just wanted to make sure.
If it looks like that, if it looks like an orange cover with somebody
Yeah.
in their bedroom, that's the right one. Well done. Okay, what do you want? Let's talk about that. You tell me what you'd like to talk about.
What made you write this book, and and how long did it take you?
Or those are two really big questions. Well, what made me write it was I adored. So it's my second book. So I've got another book that was published about 9 years ago that's called Reflective Parenting, a guide to understanding what's going on in your child's mind. Long title, and that was for parents and carers of very young, well, not very young children, but sort of under 12s, I guess, kind of pre-teens. And in that book, I talked a lot about what we've just been talking about in this conversation, really, mentalizing and understanding perspectives, but also emotion regulation. You said, which I thought was really important of you, brave as well to say, you didn't feel your parents taught you about emotions. They didn't say to you, oh, you're nervous, or you're hungry even maybe, or you're frightened. So you didn't learn emotion understanding, and regulation then is much harder. And I talk about that a lot in the first book, about the importance for parents to do that in the children's first few years. But also because I work with a lot of young people who haven't had that experience, a bit like you've described, but they've had, very poor sort of emotional, I suppose, an education or a sort of upbringing that helps them understand their own emotions and their own thoughts. I wanted to look at then, what can caregivers do to kind of help change that? How can they teach that? Can you teach somebody who hasn't had that in their early life how to sort of regulate their emotions, as well as children who are still in their birth families? I was wanting to help parents with very young children think about what you do to help your child understand themselves well and regulate themselves. So that was the first book. And then partly because my own children started to go through adolescence, become teenagers, but also because I really like working with teenagers and young people. And I used to run a self-harm CAMS tier 3, but outpatient team for self-harming young people. And I've always been really keen to support young people who struggle to regulate their emotions. And I think that is obviously a terrible experience when feelings become so overwhelming that you seek to regulate by harming, yourself, or finding a strategy to kind of regulate that doesn't involve talking to somebody. So, sometimes it ends up being something that's self-sacrificing. So a combination of doing that work and having my own teenagers, I realised that this is the next sort of book, really. This is the next important stage, is to think about parenting young people. And it's not just teenagers. I go right up to sort of mid-20s. So I'm talking about being a caregiver to somebody who might be a young adult, not just a sort of 16-year-old. I think then emotion regulation gets more complicated because not only are you, if you've had difficulty regulating yourself early on, going to struggle a bit more, but anyway, part of being an adolescent, part of being a teenager, is there's all sorts of changes happening in your brain that mean that you're more impulsive, you're more likely to take risks, you're less likely to be able to forward plan, you're less likely to be able to take other people's perspectives. And so taking all those things into consideration, I felt like, and it's a risky time of life, this is a stage where parents could really do something to try and understand what their teenager's going through. Again, not to just sort of fix them or to stop them or control them, but how would it actually be if I wrote a book to help parents understand the needs of teenagers and young people and how they had to adapt their parenting to that stage of life? You can't take the same approach with a 17, 18-year-old as you can with a 5 or 6-year-old. And I sort of start the book off in that way, where I've got an image of a parent with a very young child who's kind of running along the road, and a car comes sort of fast down the road, and the parent kind of runs and grabs the child and brings them back and sort of yanks them back. And the parent has control. They can stop them doing something dangerous. And then I say, imagine now that child is 15 and they're heading out the door with a bag that you don't know what's in it, and they say they're going off to a party and they're meeting some people, but they won't tell you who. And you ask what's in the bag, and they say just some stuff. And the parent feels powerless. They can't do what they did with the young child and sort of drag them back. They're just helpless. So what I do in the book is I put forward lots of different scenarios. So I make them a combination of people that I've worked with, but no one is a whole. Obviously, they're anonymized and there's not a single identifiable person in there. They're a kind of composite of lots of different people that I've worked with. And I describe some sort of common problems that teenagers have through these scenarios. Some of them not so risky, some of them much more risky. But I also have a couple of chapters on parenting a young person with ASD or ASC, because that's one of my main interests. And also another chapter on how do you parent a teenager who's had a history of trauma. So those are my areas of interest. So what I'm saying is parents and caregivers, they can do something to connect. So the title is really to say how we might stereotype teenagers as these kind of prickly, spiky, like stay away from me cacti. That's not actually the reality. What young people need is to feel safe and to feel there's somebody who can help and who's close by, even though they might be sending the message that says, go away, keep away, I've got my sort of spikes out. Actually, they need to know that somebody's available and there. And I think that is very confusing for a lot of parents and caregivers. They don't know quite how close to get or how distant to keep back.
It reminds me of the time when I went into a contact center. I got distressed, so contact had to end. And we were going back to placement. I was going back with one and stuff. This was a few years ago. And I went back to the house. I was really angry. I was really upset. And I was like, I wanted you to come inside the house. You didn't read my mind. How do you not read my mind? And they started laughing. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. Like, I was like, I just expected this person just to read my mind.
Yeah.
I wanted you
Yeah.
to come in, even though I said no, physically said no. I t I wanted you to come inside. I feel like that need of belonging or feeling safe and stuff like that, it never stops.
Exactly.
It may look
Exactly.
different, but it doesn't
Yeah,
stop.
that's right. Exactly, Rashmi. So that's what I'm saying in the book is that the message might look like go away or in swear words. But it's really important for parents, caregivers, adoptive parents to understand well, there's a couple of things. One thing is teenagers and young people need to say that because they need to separate from their parents and their caregivers. It's a really important part of your identity formation is that you become a separate person from your parents or your foster carer or your key workers. You need to, for your own development, say, I'm different from you, I'm my own person. I've got my own identity. This is where I'm going. And that's really healthy. There's nothing wrong with saying, keep back. I'm here. This is my space. That's really healthy because you've got to be a separate person because you've got to survive in the world. It's adaptive. You're not going to be able to always have somebody there for you your whole life that there are going to be situations where you've got to do things for yourself. And that's an important part of your lifespan development. But at the same time, what I'm encouraging parents to understand is that message that says, go away, keep back from me, because I need to be separate, or I might need to be private and keep things private from you. That's also part of, your developing identity. That doesn't negate the need to know that you're there for me. It's not a one or the other, it's both. And that's something, yeah, that's what you're describing is you wanted to sort of get away from everybody, but you didn't want to be left feeling abandoned or alone. And I think that parents and caregivers can take that message very literally when someone says back off. And it's very hard because it's back to what I was talking about earlier about self-regulation. And the reason I think that's so important for parents is that if someone says to you sort of F off, you've got to take that, and as much as you might not like it, you've got to regulate yourself in response to that, because the worst thing you can do is say F off back and then leave that person feeling rejected and alone. And that's often what it's hard to balance, because someone swears at you, tells you they don't like you or they hate you or go away, wish you were dead. If a young person says that to their parent then really struggles to regulate themselves. And, what we do when we're dysregulated is we lash out. A parent might swear back, or they might do something, they might be physically aggressive back, might attack. And it's the opposite, obviously, that's needed. But in order to stay calm in that situation, parents got to understand what's going on in their own mind. I feel really hurt that you're telling me to sort of stay away, or telling me I don't understand or I don't get it. That, is an affront to me. But I've got to regulate myself and understand that's not really about me. That's more about what you need. What you need is to say, I'm an individual. I don't think like you. I want you to see me for who I am. And I want you to understand me and try and understand why I'm so angry or upset or worried. To try and understand somebody else means you've got to feel back to your oxygen mask sort of analogy. It means if say you're doing that to me and I was your carer, I've got to, in order to be able to understand why you're feeling like that, I've got to be sufficiently regulated myself, haven't I? Because I've got to be in a frame of mind where I want to really understand what you're going through. And it's hard to get in that frame of mind if you're feeling really upset yourself.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that sort of, I suppose I would call it like distance regulation, kind of how close and how distant a caregiver or parent needs to be with their teenagers. So in the context of my book, this title, How Do You Hug a Cactus, is really asking, how do you get close to somebody when they're saying, I don't want to be close? And how can you understand that actually that message isn't, I don't want you to be close to me, it's the opposite. And the thing I think that you were highlighting is it's a difficult balance. It's difficult to know when. So, someone might try and, a bit like your support workers, you said when you're trying to get to your room, they're trying to get too close to you. They're trying to get in the way of you, maybe. And that might be their attempt to keep you safe. But you see that as it's very intrusive. It's much too close.
And it's really I remember what I was going to say now. The thing is,
Right.
like, I'm a person where if I get touched, I will react. I would either go like this, or it might not be it might not just be like, oh, I'm going to strangle you. It's going to be like
Yeah.
back off.
Yeah.
Like, but the thing is, when I'm working, it's different. It's like when a young person, or even it could be somebody on the street who's like, really unwell, or or even if it's just a young person that I'm working with, and if they hurt me, I'll be like, oh, it's fine. It's like, it's okay. It's like, yeah, you're upset. I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's that, isn't it? You just said it. I get it. So it's something that you understand. I think maybe, I don't know. I don't know you, so I don't want to put an interpretation on your behavior when we've only just met. But I'm guessing that when you lash out is when someone does something that's a kind of reaction to you that shows that really they're not getting you at all. That they're
And they're
doing some,
predictable. It's always
yeah,
unpredictable as well. I feel like
yeah,
one thing that I keep saying, I feel like this is how some certain people, I think when I say it, the way that I say it, they were like, oh, she might have autism. Like as we talked about before, is when I say humans are unpredictable. That's how I say it. It's like I find I'm very unpredictable. I don't even know what I'm gonna do in the next 2 minutes. I might just shut my laptop when I had enough. I don't know. I probably wouldn't do that. But if it was a different
yeah,
me saying, I don't know, with my
yeah,
professionals, I'm like, instead of me just
yeah.
going shouting at someone, I might just shut my laptop. Yeah.
But I wonder if the difference is, and you obviously know this much better than me, but like with this podcast and with this interview, I feel like you're very in control. Like,
Yes.
to me, you're running this. I'm just your guest. That's right. It's your podcast. It's not mine. But do you think when you're in control of something, which you are at work, aren't you? You're with your training, with the podcasting and all this work. Like, do you think then it's easier for you to not just suddenly shut the laptop lid down? Because in a way, you're in the command of this. You're kind of setting the rules, if you like. You setting the conditions for it. You told me very clearly the timing of it, how long we'd meet for, what time it would finish, that you can ask me some questions. Yeah, which is all good, by the way. It's all helpful to me because it gives me the structure as well. But I wonder, does that help you to sort of regulate yourself a bit, that you're feeling in control of this?
I feel like when I'm in control, I thrive. It
Yeah,
doesn't, it's like I know the structure. Let's just say like the conversation is not as like we're not like you're giving me like 3 word answers. I know like I have a list of questions right next to me on my screen that is going to prompt me to ask you something else that
yeah,
might get more of an answer. Like I have all sort of possible scenarios all planned out.
yeah.
It's
Highly
like
organized.
yeah,
You're highly organized, but it's all you've organized it. So in a sense, it's kind of you can shape the way that this goes, can't you?
yeah.
And I wonder if that is in itself quite regulating. I would certainly feel when I'm doing training or when I'm planning a meeting, if I'm setting the agenda, I mean, it can be nerve-wracking as well because you want it to go well, but I wonder if the predictability is helpful.
It's the predictability, but the thing is like I've got control of the situation. Just
Mm,
knowing that is regulating. Like I've got control of
exactly.
the situation. If I said that
Yeah.
as a self-affirmation, instead of like an actual fact, it wouldn't have the same effect as because there's still unpredictability. Like when
Yeah.
I deliver training, I have handouts. So if that screen goes off or the electricity in in the building is gone, I have
Yeah.
handouts for every
So
single
you're
person.
prepared, you're really prepared.
Yeah, because it's and it's the fact that I feel like it's somebody a few other people's mentioned. My introduction is always the same. It's this is 2 hours long. This is your podcast as much as mine. If you don't want to answer anything, that's fine.
Mm,
If you want to go at length about something, great, lovely. It's all at your own pace and
mm,
comfortability.
yeah.
And I feel like in situations I give what I want to other people to make them comfortable. So I
Yeah.
do the things that make me comfortable. And I'll be
Yeah.
like, oh, that probably might make the other person comfortable. Because when
Yeah.
you go to training, nobody, unless, they say, but some people are not going to say, oh, I have ADHD, so I might need to move around. I'll be like, okay, so we've talked for 30 minutes, let's have a 10-minute move around.
Yeah. It's hard though, isn't it, sometimes? Because I think that I often wonder about whether, because I'll say that to somebody, but then I think it takes a certain sort of confidence for someone then to say, this is what I need.
But yeah, even if it's in a room full of 3 other people, it's like, okay, this person's managing, that person's managing, that person seems really into what the trainer's talking about. So I need to be in control. Like everybody knows probably from my stimming or my like tapping or like certain things I do that I am autistic. It's very obvious to people when I'm like in certain situations. So I can't just leave and look different.
Mm,
I don't want to be seen as less than because I just can't stay in a training.
yeah. But you're not showing any of those things in this context, is what I'm saying. And I think that that is great, for you, that you've got a way of um, running your own show very, very competently, much more competently than a lot of people would be able to your age, I think.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I
No,
don't
I
know
mean
what.
I mean it genuinely. It's impressive. And I guess that maybe is I wonder, so one of my sons is on the spectrum. And I remember when he was, I mean, he's older now, but I remember when he was very little, it was Halloween. And so trick or treating, it's a complete nightmare because it's so unpredictable. You're walking around the streets, it's really busy and crowded, there's all the stimulation, knocking on doors, you've got to kind of hold your little pumpkin out to get the sweets. You might not get as many as anybody else. Total nightmare. And he used to get really upset quite often, but he still wanted to do it. And then one year, he said, I think I'm just going to answer the door. Because you answer the door for other people at trick or treat. And it was like 100% better experience for him because he was in control. it was totally predictable. People are going to knock on the door. I'm going to give them sweets. I'm going to say trick or treat. They're going to do da 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 da. I mean, like you, he would be described as high functioning, and um, and yet, those sort of situations where things are more in control are definitely much more regulating. And the difficulty, I think, is that life is not predictable. If only it was. And unexpected things happen all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
Even however small they are. It might be just, the weather's not how you wanted it to be, or, you're ill when you're meant to be doing something important, or, there's all sorts of things, aren't there,
Mm.
that can happen. And I think that the energy it takes then to regulate yourself around that, as one of the things I'm talking about in the book, the chapter for parents of people on the spectrum, is trying to really understand that what is going on in your mind, what you think's helpful, is not necessarily a right fit for somebody who's having an experience of things being overwhelming, because of some sensory stimulation, or feeling of being different, or just not understanding a certain social situation. Got to really try hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, what does that feel like for them? And I think you often can't guess, you can't get it right necessarily, because I can't read your mind any more than you can read mine. So what I really try to encourage parents and caregivers to do is just to be curious. They don't have to be experts, they just have to be curious. Curiosity is the most important quality of parenting, I think. So not like, oh, I know what you're feeling, or maybe you're stressed by this, but just to simply be curious of like, what was that like for you? Or how did you experience that? Or I wonder why you got upset there, or you rushed to your room and you wanted to get away from me quickly. I don't know why, but I'm really curious to know. I often think that is very, very regulating.
And you know what? It's about like the thing is like, but when somebody makes assumptions, you're like, oh, they don't understand me. What's the point of me explaining? Da, da, da. When like somebody's willing to work through it, even if I don't know, but if you were, well, at this point you did this, at this point you did this, at this point you did this, and you're like, oh, I remember that I did this because they kept banging on the door, so I took
Right.
the doorbell thing out because the battery's out. Like, like trying to piece together. But when somebody, I feel like that's really important when people are curious, when you help piece them together, because that builds the emotional regulation. Because
Yeah.
you're being somebody's being curious, so it makes you think as well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like phrasing or the way that people phrase and the tone of their voice is really, really different.
Oh, say a bit more
Important.
about that. I'm interested in what.
If
So what do
somebody
you
is
think?
like, "Oh, what happened then?" I've had people speak to me like that, and I'm like,
Oh,
"Fuck off!"
yeah. I immediately felt like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm like, but I was like,
yeah,
"Oh, Rosemary, are you okay?" That must have been really, really exhausting. What happened? Do you want to talk about it? And even if I say no, chances are in half an hour to an hour, I probably want to talk about it.
yeah. So
Or
it might be enough for someone to say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you then.
okay, go for it.
It might be just enough for someone to say, it's fine if you don't want to talk now, but I'm here
I'm
when
here.
you want to. That's
Yeah,
it.
it's
Not
like
the what, not the kind of what was that about? Because not only obviously tone of voice is important, and that sounds just sort of hostile and aggressive, but also in that moment, like we were talking about earlier, you maybe don't know. You don't know what's not necessarily going on for you right in that moment, or you might think, oh, it's that that's irritating me. And then later on you realize, well, no, it wasn't just that, it was kind of something more than that, something
yeah,
else was behind that. And I think that often what you need is just space and time.
yeah. And the questions being thrown at your face is not always helpful. It's like a
No,
prompting question like the way the question that I asked in a much nicer tone, it's enough to prompt you if you want to have a conversation, but it is also um a question closer. Like it also stops from a conversation from happening if you don't want the conversation to happen.
yeah.
And the thing is, it's like, for example, when I was supposed to say in this placement, not this one, a previous one, amazing placement, until I was 25. But I found out in June and I had to move up by October when I turned 18 because they couldn't
Oh,
get dual registration. And they understood my needs. What amazing the CEO, the chief executive, had ADHD. The quality assurance manager had ADHD. And it's like they've worked in SEN. Oh my God, they were amazing.
yeah.
From July till September, I had incidents every day. I was having over, I would have an incident every day, multiple times a day. I didn't understand what it was, but they would prompt me to have
Mm.
conversations. And they're like, oh, do you want to talk about it? And I'd be like, no. Do you want to talk about it? No. Rosemary, let's explore what's going on. No. And then I was like, okay, fine. Well, if you want to, like, okay, let's talk about it. I don't want to talk about it because I sort of subconsciously I probably knew what it was, why I was having certain, you know, cri like why I was having crises so often, but I
Mm.
didn't know consciously. And they were like, Rosemary,
Mm.
are you gonna miss Danny when you move? Danny was the chief executive. We got on really, really well. I see him as a father figure. It was amazing. And I was like, and he's like, are you gonna miss Danny? And I was like, no, no. When I say no like that, it's a yes. And I was like, no, no, I don't care about Danny. I don't care about. Whereas when that guy walks through the door, what no, when I hear his car tires on the gravel, I know it's him. I open the door, I get excited. I'm like a golden retriever. So when I'm like saying no, I don't care about him. What?
Yeah.
What? Who does he think he is? Why are we talking about him? Or
Mm.
is like, agrees me. Do you want? Is uncertainty? Or when I'm
Yeah.
distressed, when my one of my key workers, she turned out to be a very terrible person. Anyway, one of my key workers left, like for a holiday for annual leave. I got distressed, and then I started pulling out a pot, and I started making eggs, boiled eggs, because that's what she was going to do for every single day for lunch. And it's like,
Mm.
yeah, it didn't get made. It was like, and it's like exploring that behavior is helpful, but when that person's ready,
Yeah,
and sometimes it needs to
exactly.
be addressed right there and then. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's really like this is very controversial what I'm about to say, but I don't think children are violent. They might have behaviors that are violent, but inherently children are not violent, number one. Number two,
Hmm.
I think children learn behavior from their environment, their home, wherever it may be, and or was television or whatever, but they're not violent. It's whether they learn how to cope with that or they that's the only thing they're able to do. They don't
Yeah.
know how to regulate themselves yet.
Well, that's right. I mean, we all have aggressive impulses. We psychologists believe that we all have a sort of an aggressive drive. And that's just part of normal emotions. But it's how that's expressed, isn't it? Does
Hmm.
that turn into kind of lashing out, hurting other people, or is that just about kind of having a temper tantrum when you're little and being helped to sort of regulate yourself and pick yourself back up? But that kind of rage, you see, this might sound odd to you, but as psychologists, we would believe this, that babies can have a really aggressive rage. You see a screaming baby that's hungry and they're raging. But what's important is for their parent to help them manage that rage by comforting, reassuring them that they're there, reassuring them that they're going to be fed and that they're going to be changed, and bringing about that emotion regulation right from the beginning that says, I recognize how you're feeling and I can help you manage that feeling.
Hmm.
And that's the sort of at the heart, I suppose, of all of mine and my colleagues' work, is to kind of go back to thinking about, was that adult, child, young person helped to regulate their emotions when they were little? And of course, if they weren't, through no fault of their own, of course, then it's much harder to manage rage, or it's much harder to manage fear, because you haven't been helped in regulating it when you should have been.
Hmm.
So we shouldn't be surprised when people who've had traumatic relationships in their families have big rages or emotional sort of explosions in their childhood or in their teens because no one's helped them to regulate that. It's not their fault. So I think if we can understand that and think this is just a kind of a skill that needs to be learned, really, and it takes obviously a lot longer if you haven't learned it when it's like a language almost. If you grew up, I don't know whether you speak more than one language. Do you speak any other languages? What do you speak?
Tamil. It's my mother tongue though.
Right, so you speak Tamil and English?
Yeah.
Right. So you probably grew up speaking Tamil and English, did you, at the same time? So no one had to teach it you. So it just, it flows for you, I imagine. If I was to try and learn Tamil now, I'd probably never be fluent in it. I might learn a lot of language. I could probably immerse myself in it to the point that I might have a really good conversation, but I'd probably never be fluent. Maybe I'd have to live there for 10, in a country that spoke Tamil for 10 years. But with emotion regulation, it's very similar. If you in that sort of critical period of development, say in the first 1,001 days of your life, which is considered to be the most important time for all those emotional development, as well as some aspects of physical development, if you learn emotion regulation then, it's much easier when you're 18. If you haven't learned it then, doesn't mean you can't learn it. Like I can learn Tamil, but it's just much harder.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's like it's so difficult. It's like especially when you work with support workers who don't have that much experience and they what why can't you regulate? Why can't you regulate? Like just calm down. It's like
Yeah,
even learning to calm down or just stop. Because
yeah,
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm just a go, go, go person, even when I'm distressed. And I can't calm myself down without additional help.
yeah,
And it might take me 10, 15 years to learn that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's people find it strange because it's not the norm, but it's our norm.
Yeah. But when
And
you say it's not the norm, I mean, that's right. Probably the majority of people have had, say if you think of like attachment, secure attachment, probably that's 60-ish% of the population will have that. So, but that's another 40% that don't. That's millions, billions of people worldwide. So it's not that it's rare to find it difficult to regulate your emotions. And a bit like, obviously you're very, very, very aware of all the issues around neurodivergence. I think the issues around emotion regulation, we need to raise awareness of that as well. And of course, in lots of fields, people have a lot of knowledge and they're very sensitive to it. In the average sort of public space, people have no knowledge about it and no tolerance for it. Hence your example of the guy filming somebody on the floor having a psychotic attack. It's not yet in the common sort of language, is it, or society's kind of acceptance that it's okay to be dysregulated, that actually we shouldn't just see that as something abnormal, that let's have some sort of compassion and understanding of, oh, you're struggling now, or you need space now, I'm going to give you that space, And you do see it in places that just a very small anecdote. I was in a shop in Balham last week, and there was a woman there becoming really, really distressed. And I think she was living in supported housing in Balham, Tooting area, probably maybe ex-Springfield, like, you mentioned Springfield Hospital earlier. But she was living in somewhere in supported housing. And the young women behind the till, they were absolutely brilliant with her. It was like they were support workers, even though they weren't. They were just serving behind the, counter in the shop. And I sort of said to one of the women, like, you were fantastic with her, really patient, really kind, really tolerant, really calm. And she said, oh, we've just learned to be like that with her because she comes in every day, sort of quite distressed and wants to, I don't know, quite what she wants, but she goes in and she kind of then gets distressed about where she is, I think. But I really saw the other side of people being mistreated, and I saw this lovely, compassionate side of these young girls who were quite inexperienced, really, probably not much older than you, but they just got it. They just got it. That like no point sort of throwing her out the shop or telling her to stop bothering the other customers. They've just like calmed her down. Fantastic.
It's amazing. And I feel like even with, we go to other services, like the police. It's like force first, even though they say the least restrictive force. But talking someone down, if they're in immediate danger, that's different. But if
Mm,
they're like
yeah,
just calming them down, especially
yeah,
in what's it called? There's this police show, I think it's BBC or something like that, about police misconduct. And there was one of them who was laughing and making fun of the girl. She's like, exposing herself, not on purpose because of restraints and stuff like that. She's on the
yeah,
ground, and
yeah,
they're just laughing, making like, comments, and this NHS staff have called to assist because she's outside,
yeah.
can't do much. So she and they were just making fun, and the NHS staff got really upset, as rightfully so,
Mm,
about the fact that, the way that we're treating and talking about her. And I'm like, it's like this is a person, this is a regular this is a person. And that police officer actually knew this person as well. And I'm like, that raises other issues as well. Like the way that he
yeah,
was, and it was like,
yeah.
it's like you just need to, like, sometimes, like, if you're gonna just throw force at someone, even if it's the least restricted one, it's just gonna escalate things.
Of course, yeah.
There's
It
this
just
time where,
aggravates.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. There's this time where I was sectioned, I ran out the hospital, and he put me on the ground, and he just held me really, really, really tight. Really, really tight. He just held me, and I was just rocking back and forth, and I calmed down, and I walked myself back into the hospital. It's like this, it's not like, And it's like there's not my biological mum, my chosen mother. She says hugs, not holds. Sometimes a hug is really like I like deep compression.
Right, do you? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So just a hug.
yeah. That helps
Oh,
you. Yeah, feels
yeah, like
good.
a really, really tight one. And I'm like, great. I like. No, this sounds strange, but I think we're like 7 kilogram weighted blankets.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah,
a heavy blanket.
it is a heavy blanket. Oh, so
Yeah,
comfortable.
you love it.
Yeah, I love it. It makes it's everything.
Nice.
And I don't think people understand how exhausting being distressed is.
Mm,
Like, I
yeah.
can sleep for like, I'm someone who's like insomniac. I can't sleep for days at a time. So it's like at one point it was like 16 days and I haven't slept. And it comes with their own struggles as well with
Well,
hallucinations.
that's massive. I think it's definitely exhausting being distressed, but I was also thinking you were about to say, I thought you were about to say, don't pe think people realize how exhausting it is trying to kind of keep yourself from getting distressed, because that's also exhausting, isn't it?
Oh my God, that's so exhausting. I feel like we need another podcast for that.
You know, a lot of young people I work with, the school will say, "They're absolutely fine here." And then the parents will say, oh, you know, it all comes out when they get home,
Yeah.
particularly young people on the spectrum and with ADHD often, because, you know, what is obvious to me and you probably, maybe not so obvious to the families immediately, is that they're keeping they're keeping themselves in check all day for like 6 hours from sort of 9 till 4 or whatever, you know. And that takes a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of work. So if you're trying to read the social situation, read the rules of the school, not get distressed when the fire alarm goes off, not react when the dinner doesn't smell like something that you can tolerate, you know, the hand dryer goes off in the toilet, like etc., etc. All those things that can really aggravate. If you're keeping it together for 6 hours straight, of course you're going to be absolutely shattered when you get out of school or get out of work if you're, you know, an adult and you're having to sort of negotiate all of the things like just even traveling to work and then being in a meeting and, you know, having to sit still, or, you know, there's so many things that if you're neurodivergent and or if you've got emotion regulation difficulties, if you're keeping it together all day, then it's absolutely draining to then, you know, just you've got to let, I always think of it like a coat that's really like tightly buttoned up.
With
And then
Mento.
you, yeah, yeah. And then you come out and it's like you rip the coat off and you can just let go. and I think that can't be underestimated, just how tiring that is. And then, of course, how helpful it is to have a space to go in the day, a calm place where you can just decompress.
Even half an hour. Like if I go to
Yeah,
like, if I need to do a free shop, I go in half an hour. I'm exhausted when I come back, and I'll probably be
yeah.
exhausted like for 4 6 hours. Or if I go for socializing, for example,
Mm,
it could be 2 hours. The next 2 days, I'm recovering.
yeah.
It's
Well,
like
how about this interview? I was wondering, is this tiring for you?
when it's engaging, when it's a back and forth, no.
Are you
But I'm
okay
probably
now?
yeah, I'm okay now. I was tired before, but I'm a
Right.
bit more energized. But it's probably gonna go. I'm probably gonna
Yeah.
hash in a bit, like when this is finished. It's like when your body is about to crash because it's like, okay, we're gonna keep regulating, we're gonna keep it all together
Yeah.
until 6:30, and
Yeah.
then we can scream, we can shout, we can do whatever to
Yeah.
get all
You
of it out.
see, how we started the conversation talking about the sort of mental health, and I was saying about I think everyone has mental health. I feel like everybody has a certain degree of social anxiety and emotion regulation difficulties.
Hmm.
So, you're maybe, well, you're doing this brilliantly. You're doing a fantastic job here. I don't think I've had such a good kind of experience of someone being really clear and organized and their interview. It's fantastic. And then afterwards, you might then suffer a bit from the exhaustion of all the energy you've put into this. I think everybody has that to a certain extent. If say I think I'm averagely sociable. I'm not an extrovert, but I'm not an introvert. I'm probably sort of somewhere in the middle. But if I was
Anti,
to
something in the middle.
if I was to go to a party this evening and I had to speak to loads of different people in a room, even if they were people I know I'd be exhausted after an hour or two. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably quite typical that, and we kind of pathologize that and say, oh, this person's got social anxiety, or this person, can't socialize easily. But actually,
It's just a social
maybe
battery.
maybe we just need to normalize actually the energy that's involved in engaging socially with multiple people who have multiple perspectives and different personalities. Maybe we just need to recognize that in itself for everybody is exhausting up to a point, and that only a very small section of the population thrive on that.
Mhm.
If we took that approach and kind of normalized that a bit more, then people who like to have their own space, people who like to kind of take time to regulate, that would be seen as that would be the norm then. That would be one of my ambitions, is to see that, yeah, destigmatize that need to kind of just take some space for yourself, to be quiet.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like it's like but the thing is because of like I like to keep my autism like structure. My ADHD is like do whatever. I'm like
How do
it's like
those two parts of yourself talk to each other?
um they're war.
Right, are they? Okay.
Yes, like literally I struggle to get out of bed and I'm like I want to cancel all my meetings. Then my autism's like, well, you had this structure, you had this plan, you've been preparing for 6 weeks for this, you've been da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, I need and my ADHD's like, don't get out of bed, just cancel it. Lie to them. Say lie to I'm like,
You're
uh,
very honest.
yeah.
That's good. That's good.
I'm
You're
like,
very honest.
lie to them. And I'm like, oh, and I end
That's
up
just
doing it. And I'm like
that's
exhausted.
a
I'm like, I want to get out of this. Get
yeah,
me out of this.
yeah.
But when it's engaged,
Did you have a bit of that about this podcast?
I had the feeling of I'm exhausted, but I didn't have
Yeah.
the feeling to cancel because
Okay.
I was like, I need something afterwards after like all that absolute mess in the hospital. I need something
Okay.
like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Well,
like
that's good.
yeah, this
So does it
morning.
help energize you, do you think, doing this?
Only if it's like an engaging conversation. Sometimes
Yeah,
people don't engage.
yeah.
Some people can go on for a long time, but they're talking about the same thing, just using different words. I had this
Right.
lady, Dr. Anne Marie, earlier on this morning. She speaks with quite a bit of length, but she speaks about so many different things. She's talking, you have this question and she answers it even before you ask. It's
That's
so
good.
engaging. It's so
Yeah.
amazing. But when somebody's like yeah, and saying the same thing again and again and again, but in different words, I'm like, I want my laptop to like just break.
Yeah. Yeah. Move it on. Move it on.
Yeah, I filmed that like I think you're gonna be the 32nd podcast or something.
Wow, well done. That's brilliant.
Oh, thank you. We filmed 42 podcasts, maybe a bit more, and six of them are definitely not going out.
Mentioning no names.
Yeah, no.
So we're really reaching the end of our time nearly, aren't we?
Yeah, I have some like questions, like some really quick questions.
Go for it.
So, looking back on our conversation, what's the most important takeaway or message you want an audience to remember?
I think because I'm hoping that the audience might have some parents as well as young people, I think I'm wanting the most important thing for them to take away is that if you're a parent of a teenager or a young person, or even a younger child, and they're struggling to regulate themselves, just be aware of what's going on in your own mind at the same time as what you're trying to achieve in understanding them or fixing them. Just be self-aware first. So mentalize yourself first. Very much the oxygen mask on first before you start trying to intervene or do something with somebody else. That would be my take-home message, I think.
I feel like that's a very important takeaway message. Are there any upcoming projects, events, or resources you'd like to share with the people listening?
Oh, well, resources. I'd be, happy for people to look into my written work, into either of the books. So the How Do You Hug a Cactus is the latest one, but if people are interested in my first one, they can look at those. They're both on Amazon, or they can go to my website, which is redfernpsychology.org. In terms of projects coming up, I've just finished being part of a research study into fostering. We did a study with 500 involving 540 foster carers to look at how we can support them to support the stability of their placement. So that's going to be the results of that are being analysed at the moment. So people can look out for that. It's called reflective fostering. And yeah, I think I'm just really keen to work more with people like you, with experts by experience, both neurodivergent young people, people who have experience of family trauma and they're happy to talk about that and educate other people a little bit in how that impacts them and what's helpful and what isn't helpful. I think that's just, I'd like to see the conversation around that increase so that people understand a bit more about how that kind of trauma really affects people in their everyday lives. I guess that's sort of, it's loosely called trauma informed, but that has so many different meanings. I think it's almost lost its meaning. I
Yeah.
think just family trauma, I want people to understand just how important that is to someone's development, but also in a more hopeful way that there's a lot that teachers, carers, key workers, friends can do to help somebody when they are struggling to regulate themselves, and just ask somebody, be curious. Be curious about what's going on for them and what they need. Keep
Yeah.
your curiosity alive would be my final message.
I won't be surprised if that's the title of your next book. If you
Maybe.
ever need support in doing that, I would be happy to help. Like we had
Oh,
such
lovely. I've
engaging
really
podcast.
enjoyed speaking with you, and it would be great to do something together in the future.
Definitely, definitely. Is like I've enjoyed myself so much. Like I feel like I'm gonna be on like an all high for the rest of
Oh,
this.
brilliant. That's brilliant. A Friday night high. Fantastic. That's a
Yeah.
good way to end. Well, let's keep in touch with each other, and maybe you'll write the next book and I'll just contribute a chapter.
Oh my God. Uh, I'm just thinking about sitting down. Oh no. I
Actually,
think,
you asked me earlier, I never answered you about how long it took me to write it. It took me years because I have a full-time job, I have a family, and I don't have any time or I'm not paid to write the book. So I just have to do it in a bit of my so-called spare time. So it's a bit of a, it's a challenge to write a book, but I feel like when you've done it and you've communicated your ideas, the big hope then is that somebody reading it, whether that's someone your age or a parent or caregiver, that actually they find that useful and that helps them to kind of develop their curiosity about themselves and other people. That would be a massive win for me if I achieve that.
sure you will, because your books and your links to your resources will also be like linked in the description of both
Oh,
Spotify.
that's very
Um,
kind of you. Thank you.
it's okay. And finally, what's one thing that you're grateful for today?
Oh, I'm grateful today for having met up this morning with so I call her a friend now. She's actually a foster carer called Michelle, who was part of our fostering project, and she offers emergency placements to young people in the care system. She just had her 100th child with her. 100. She's only been doing this for 3 years. And I'm just really proud of her, and I really appreciate having her as a friend now. She used to be a kind of colleague, I suppose, or somebody that I work with, and I met up with her in King's Cross this morning for a coffee, and we had a really good old chinwag by the canal in King's Cross on the steps. So that was really nice.
Oh, that sounds absolutely lovely.
And the sun shone. We were warm.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, the sun
yeah.
was shining a lot today.
What about you? What's the thing? Why don't we end with what have you made sort of proud of today or grateful for?
Um, I'm grateful for doing this podcast. It's really made my
Nice.
day.
Oh,
So
that's
thank you.
great. Thank you.
It's
Wonderful.
it's an absolute pleasure on having you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've loved the conversation. It's really
Yeah,
great meeting you.
it was really great meeting you too. It was amazing. Probably the best podcast this year. Got to that.
Thank you so much.
It's
That's a
okay.
real compliment. Brilliant.
I'll let you get back to your family. I'm sure they're waiting for you.
I don't know where they are right now, but all I know
Oh,
is that I promised I'd be finished by 6:30. So my office is in the garden, so I'm somewhat detached from the house. So I need to
I,
go back in the house.
I assumed that, and I was like, this sounds like a nice getaway place.
It's a getaway. It is. I'm like in a so you'd like it because it's an entirely separate space. And
Yeah,
I've even got my cat in here. I don't know if you can see in the background there
yeah.
that there's
I saw it. The cat was moving, and I was like,
yeah, she's
that's a nice cat.
it's quite calm in here. She's quite calm. But really lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's okay.
And
It's my pleasure.
all right. I hope you have a good evening and do keep in touch with me. We'll chat about any future projects. Let's think about what might work well for us.
Perfect.
All right.
I would love to. Thank you so
Take
much.
care now. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend.
You too. Have a good
All right.
weekend.
Bye then.
Thank you for watching My Trauma's Chronic by My Iconics podcast, where we had a deep and insightful conversation about mental health, particularly in the context of teenage distress. We've discussed the challenges of being a parent and caregiver to a young person struggling with their mental health and the importance of self-awareness and empathy in such situations. We also touch upon the issues of institutionalized care and the difficulties faced by those who don't fit neatly into existing categories. The conversation was marked by a sense of compassion and understanding, and a commitment to doing more. So, thank you for watching. Stay iconic. Until next time.